Good morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to the first ever Bath Life Business Surgery. I hope this finds this as well as it might, and that you, your loved ones and your teams are safe currently. My name is Greg and welcome to this business surgery. I'm from Media Clash and we publish Bath Life. The aim of these sessions is to provide free, helpful advice on all aspects of running a business during this pandemic and preparing it for life on the other side, whenever that is, in whatever form that is. These are days when our worlds have been turned upside down and when we can all do with help and advice to help us navigate these unimaginably rough waters that we're all in, even if we are in different boats. All businesses face much the same concerns. This pandemic is doing many things for our businesses and our teams, but one emerging trend is that business owners, us as a business very much included, are openly acknowledging that they're bewildered, and their employees likewise. We just don't know. We can all put on a brave face, and we have to as business owners. But few of us have a clear idea of what July to December might bring, let alone 2021. And anything that business books, those self-aggrandizing rewrites of success as sole heroic acts by the writer, those business books, they're utterly irrelevant as manuals for our current times. We need to strip right back to the very basics of why we do what we do, and then figure out what we might do going forwards. As we traverse these toughest of terrains, when we're back trading, hoping to yonk through to the sunlit uplands of better days in 2021 and beyond, we will remember the advice and thoughtfulness that were given in these times. So today we'll be hearing from Unividual, and then next week we've got a similar session Friday at 10 o'clock on legal and HR matters with Burgess Druitt, so please look out for that. We'll touch on some of those issues today, but we'll pen most of the more detailed stuff until next week, such as, for example, some elements of the job recruitment, job retention scheme, and dare I say, potentially redundancies. Let's come on to financial planning this morning. We'll cover everything from cash flow forecasting to refinancing, from loans to the new commercial world, from cost control to potentially new business models. I'll be interviewing our two speakers from Unividual on your behalf, and we'll bring in questions during it. Please ask your own. If you look at the bottom of the screen, if you're less familiar, with the Q&A button, and we can ask questions anonymously because some of these will be sensitive matters, or we can bring you in effectively on screen as well. We've got several of those already, and I'll try to cover as many as I can. If you wish to be on screen, as it were, preface your question with video and we'll try to call you in. It's a bit of a juggle, but we will give it a go. Our two speakers today, Sherry-Ann Baxter, Marketing Director and part owner of Unividual, which was founded in 2000. She runs it alongside her father and her brother, so it's very much a family business. And she understands the dynamics of such a business, as several of ours are here today. And she's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Predominantly, the advice will be through Greg Harris, a chartered financial planner, who's one of New Model's advisors, top 35 advisors in the UK. He specialises in personal finance advice and has wide experience in business financial planning with clients in many, many sectors across the Southwest. So if we may, let's start with Sherry-Ann, and let's talk about Unividual as a company. Sherry-Ann, can we bring you to screen, please? Hello.
Hello,
Good morning.
this is that awkward moment where you don't know if your video's on or not.
Yeah, I had a slight palpitation there, and I also thought that perhaps all I just said was not being heard, but there you go. Anyway, we are back in the room, as it were. So, Joanne, tell me this, how are you as a company heeding your own advice? What's your own financial planning been like in these times?
Good question. I remember the first emergency meeting we had when it looked like we were all going to have to work from home, which anyone who knows anything about our business knows that's not something we normally do. And one of the first priorities is, where are we at with our cash flow? So one of the first sort of things we looked at was, how much money have we got in the bank? And how much money are we going to need? And what have we got in savings? We had a contingency plan put in place about 5 years ago by myself for an event similar to this, not of this nature, but similar. And we were able, thankfully, to roll that out during a time when it was quite stressful for us all, when I think we first went into lockdown. So since then, we've just been weekly meetings with my co-directors, assessing cash flow, looking at where we are at from a budget point of view, and just making sure, like most business owners, that you can just keep going for as long as possible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the first rule of business right now for all of us is survival. It's just get through this in whatever way we can, as robustly as we can. But I want to ask you a specific question. When's your financial year, and how often are you reforecasting that?
So our financial year runs from January to December, well, January to January. On a normal day, we would probably be reviewing this a couple of times every quarter, but currently we are reviewing this probably bi-weekly at the moment. We have quite a long lead time when it comes to financial advice. So from the very first time you sit down with a client in that very first meeting through to when you may receive some income is quite long. It can be months, if not sometimes even a year.
So your pipeline might be more affected subsequently rather than immediately now.
That's correct. Yeah. So currently we have got income coming in, and when you combine that with the savings that we've got, we're okay. We've obviously saved money in lots of areas, such as rent, and we've applied for holidays where we could, but what we are more concerned about is what's going to be happening in the sort of next 12, 18 weeks from now, which...
All of these matters we will discuss on a general basis with others, but the reason for this line of questioning is to understand that you, like all other businesses, are facing exactly the same concerns. I'll give you it's probably $128 million question rather than $64 million, which is, what sort of recovery are you as a business anticipating? I'll come on to Greg more generally about this. What would you expect for yours, and also say for Bath PLC Limited in the years to come? Is this V-shaped recovery, which is being talked about as an absolute definite thing all of 3 weeks ago, became a U-shaped recovery, or what shaped recovery are you expecting?
I think it'd be different for every industry, and it's going to be different for every business. I think the recovery is not going to be, click your fingers and we're all going to go back to normal. I think the businesses out there that will do very, very well are those that aren't sitting around going, oh, we'll leave that until we're all back to normal. They're actually adapting to what we're now calling the new normal world. So the recovery will be different based on that. For Bath in particular, one thing I know about Bath and Bathonians is that we look after each other. And the community spirit that I felt within the city has been phenomenal. And already you're seeing businesses sort of reevaluate who they're using in terms of suppliers, and whether they can support more local companies and smaller businesses out there, perhaps self-employed people. Instead of ordering our Easter eggs from somewhere like John Lewis or Waitrose, we got them from Helen at Taste of Bath. So I think the recovery will be dependent on how we all pull together and support each other.
And this is very much something we've been pushing with Bath Life, the concept that lockdown makes everything local, and that the support, the companionship, the collaborations that are emerging, but the realizations that our cities, we all have a vested interest in supporting our cities and our businesses in our cities. And we'll come on to some of those things in a moment. Sharon, for now, thank you very much. Let me bring in Greg. And I would like to talk from an external. So we'll move from Unividual to externally to clients and so on. Just set the scene to remind us all about the loans and grants and holidays that are out there for companies.
Yeah, of course. So firstly, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is keeping well. Sort of reiterate what Greg said, and also what Sherry-Ann has also mentioned. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky world at the moment. I think we have all been inundated with information. I certainly know my email inbox has constantly got some sort of help guidance relative to the environment that we're going through at the moment. But I think, and again, Greg, you've summarised them really, really nicely there. You can split these sort of benefits and sort of advantages that the government is setting out into sort of three rough categories. You've got the grants, which typically by their nature you don't pay back. You've got the loans, which you'll receive a level of capital, but whether it's interest free for a time being or very low interest. you will have to pay back the capital and the interest element to that. And then you also get these deferrals and holidays, such as, for instance, self-employed people are able to defer their income tax payment, which they're meant to be making in July this year. So without going through them all, because there's probably a dozen or so out there at the moment, there's a few that have recently been updated or have come to the forefront of our conversations at the moment. And I think the first is probably the employee retention scheme. So a lot of people, unfortunately, have been made furloughed. Look, I think if you had said to us sort of 6 months ago, would the government pay 80% or offer to pay 80% of people's employment sort of packages, albeit up to a certain level, we probably would have all laughed. So the scheme itself has been, in my view, a massive success. I don't think we'd be where we are from an economy standpoint without it. But that being said, I think there's been a significant uptake in it. So figures that I've read, and I know we've got to be careful where we get our information from, but approximately 7.5 million people are now part of this scheme. And certainly at the beginning of the week, it was indicated that this is costing the government about £8 billion a month. That figure's actually probably been revised to close to 14. So from an impact on our sort of economy moving forward, naturally we are going to have to make changes to that, and they're likely to come out through sort of August to October time, where it's likely to be reduced from the 80% to the 60. But sort of moving forward from the other horizons, I mean, there's future benefits out there and future grants and loans that are available. So there's just two that I really want to touch on because they've got more of a positive spin on them than a lot of what's out there. And you've got things like the Future Fund, which is available to innovation businesses, of which in the Bath and Bristol area in particular, we have a huge abundance of those types of businesses. And what that would look to do is to bring in loans between about £125,000 to £5 million, depending on external investment matching for businesses that are in those sectors. And then sort of more broadly speaking, you've then got the bounce back loans as well, which are much smaller loans between about £2,000 and £50,000, which will really help some businesses out.
We want to come on to JRS and furlough elements shortly. It's one of those examples of a current heresy is tomorrow's orthodoxy, and we're all having to have those sort of jump cuts to new realities. As you say, the idea of the state paying 70 million to people to not work and specifically to not spread this disease was unimaginable recently. Comes up in a moment. The one issue, again, when it comes to cash flow planning and business planning, it's all well and good to have these loans, and with current interest rates being so low and the CBIL scheme being interest-free for the first year, however, the day of reckoning comes and the capital will have to be repaid. What is your advice to companies on, I'll put it in very simplistic terms, A, going for the maximum amount imaginable because you need to have headroom because we don't know what on earth is happening out there, but B, getting to a level which they can imagine at some stage being able to repay. If you go for too much, you actually are facing a bigger chasm in some ways. How do you actually sort of approach that as for advice?
Absolutely. So it's a really good point, Greg. I mean, the difficulty is that when, and even if we talk about examples outside of what we're currently going through, whenever there's that upfront incentive of interest-free or low interest rates, it can seem, for a lot of businesses too good to be true. And especially when businesses are looking for lifelines, there is that risk as well that people take more than they need. And you put it brilliantly, there is going to be a time when businesses are going to have to pay, certainly the loans back. I think really the tips are really to go back to the fundamentals of a good cash flow model. And there's a whole host of ways in which you can carry this out. And naturally, it's very industry specific. Unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all approach. But, there's a couple of key things with cash flowing. And I think communication, as with any sort of operation within a business, is absolutely vital. I think too often, especially with smaller businesses, it's very the sort of top tier will very much discuss, co-directors will discuss cash flow requirements and where they think the business is at. I think now more than ever, there's been a real need to engage with employees lower down that sort of hierarchy, because provided they've got the right education, it doesn't take a huge amount of time to teach people very basic fundamentals of this. They can help spot bottlenecks and things which may cause issues to cash flow, sometimes sooner than the senior members of the business. Very often, it's unfortunately the director's role or manager's role. They only are there when the issue's already happened. Actually, it's a few weeks or a few months ago that the problem could have been spotted.
Just on that point, there's an old phrase: the troops are often ahead of the generals, and that is true. It's the people absolutely in the front line who understand what's happening out there. And there's a related point, which is that because this has been such a profound shock to businesses, so much of the sense of hierarchy is stripped away. We're all ultimately just flesh and blood trying to figure this thing out. And we all need our teams to be, as you're saying very much, to be on board. But also that communication point is vital externally. And I'm going to come to that about how dealing with creditors and debtors in a moment. But I want to talk about the cash flow modelling. I'll make a general question first. And Nathan Baranowski, if you're on the call, which I think you are, I want to bring you in on the first question once I've asked this one. So let's talk about cash flow. How can businesses figure it out? They don't even know when they'll be back or what the business terrain will be like. How can you help? How can anyone create a cash flow model going out beyond a few weeks on current times?
Yeah, Greg, it's not an easy job at all. I think the phrasing there sort of provides part of the key, I think, to a certain extent. Businesses which have typically one cash flow model, and that is set in stone, are some of the businesses that struggle. Yes, cash flow by its very nature needs to be accurate, but it also needs to be and have a certain degree of flexibility. And businesses that are reviewing this moving forward and on an ongoing basis and adapting to changes. Now, I know over the last couple of months we've had a pretty significant change, but even moving forward in some form of recovery, whatever shape. I know we talked about the V versus U shape recovery. Whatever sort of shape that is, you need to be able to amend and adapt your cash flow models to that. And I think one other thing just to touch on is the sort of definition of cash flow versus revenue. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there that will specialize in this, and again, I don't want to step on too many toes, and especially when you're looking at educating people lower down that hierarchy, it's not all about what money's coming into the business. It's so important, again, goes back down to those loans, what's coming out and when is it coming out, and what could impact on your ability and a business's ability to get that out. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult question because to a certain extent it's different for every business, as we all know.
Well, let's have another very difficult question from Nathan, if you can bring yourself in.
Hiya. Hopefully I'm on audio now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice place, by the way. I might look at that.
That's our office, virtually there at the moment.
Right.
But yes. So I guess kind of in our world, we're a tech business, and we'd always be looking for a pretty easy forecast and flow position in terms of where we are, and we were on a high rapid growth position pre-COVID. Very much recognizing that as not the case now. And talking with other businesses, I think the biggest challenge that sort of feeling is that furlough is a fantastic opportunity, and it's helping to support that. But how do you forecast and forward plan based on furlough? And one of the biggest challenges in that is if you have to then start to think about redundancies, which I don't want to do. I don't want to lose any of our staff at all. But if we have to go in that direction, how do you deal with that kind of economic challenge back in when we've been potentially been offered furlough all the way till October? So how do you make any forward business challenge basis on we can't make a decision on that until October because technically we're being part funded to be able to do that? What would your view be on that?
And Greg, just prior to responding, and thank you, Nathan, for that. Prior to responding, I just want to remind everyone where we are currently, because it is not where we're going to be in a week or so's time. Currently, the JRS, the Job Retention Scheme, runs at 80% of salaries, but only until the end of July. After July, so in other words, August and September, there will be what's called a contribution by businesses. And to the exact point about cash flowing, we don't know what that contribution is. And thereby that does come into, and we're all skirting around the point, of course, this potential issue of redundancies. So Greg, there's already enough variables out there. There's a very specific variable of the exact amount of contribution businesses may have to make. To Nathan's point, how can businesses attempt to cash flow this in the next few months and come on to the potential redundancy point as well?
Yes, of course. So, well, Nathan, very, very good question. I think definitely you're not alone in your sort of requirement to know an answer. And I think that's part of what's frustrating a lot of business owners, but also individuals as well. There is a lack of clarity. And I think that there are a couple of ways which you can target this. And again, it comes to having multiple sort of cash flow models, certainly over a short-term period. I think, we've got to, again, be very careful about what information we are taking from the media at the moment. But they have given rough indications of what support is going to be there from a government perspective, and therefore what we can assume we may be sort of needing to fill the gaps with. Again, it goes back down to flexibility. It's an extremely difficult scenario for a lot of businesses to be in. And I do think, unfortunately, there are going to be businesses that will have to make staff redundant. But what I will say about that is that should be a last case. And I think for a lot of businesses, certainly in the Bath area, they would treat it as a last case scenario. But that being said, that's the world we live in, and businesses have got a duty to their shareholders if you're a larger business, but also to the remaining employees as well. Unfortunately, it's where it seems quite capitalist to a certain extent, it's for the greater good of certain things and for the wider economy. We do have to look and make some difficult decisions. What I will say is, and again, I'm not for 1 second suggesting that your business or any other businesses that are here today would do this. But one thing we can learn from bigger businesses that have already had to make staff redundant is consumers are extremely savvy about whether companies are deeming and treating their employees in the right way. And we have a benefit as a smaller business or a smaller sector where we are less in the public eye. So for me, my advice would be is learn from where we can. And again, I completely get your point that it's very difficult to predict, but learn where we can from bigger businesses and try and factor some of those responses from consumers and existing employees into models. But again, just keep reviewing things over the short term. That's, again, at this stage where we are in a complete unknown with what September and October could look like, I think just review it as often as you can, really.
To your point, I think there is a great sense of social capital of businesses that we all have in whichever way a reputation, and that we have to be, as business owners, we've got to marry that sense of what our reputation is, what value we might get from that subsequently. But yes, doing what is right for the business and for whoever remains in that business in the short term. And it's absolutely not easy for anyone contemplating that. And I know we've had a number of questions on this, and I won't name the companies in case people think, gosh, that means they might be considering this. Everyone at some stage will have to consider this if they're not already, unfortunately. I want to come on to how about the responsibilities of business owners, how anyone can try to keep an eye on the business objectives and essentially a more midterm approach with the absolute short-term need for survival. Does the midterm exist, or is it all about the very short term?
Again, very good question. The midterm at the moment is greater than it has ever been, I think, is probably the simplest way to put that. And again, it sort of leads on from Nathan's question, really. What does the future look like? And I think, look, we need to have some element of positivity when we are, as businesses, looking at this and reviewing internally but externally. And it sort of ties into, how this has all happened, and that actually this is something which has, for want of a better phrase, leveled the playing fields. Typically, when we've had economic crisis before, it's typically stemmed, again, generalizing very heavily here, but it's typically stemmed from one industry. Whereas this has not been industry specific. Yes, there are sectors such as hospitality and leisure and retail that have taken the hit the hardest, probably at the time being. But universally across the board, a lot of industries have really struggled and will continue to struggle. That being said, I think, and again, this is where the point about being local and looking at sort of Bath PLC as a whole, I mean, even wider into the Southwest, we have our legal obligations. And for those of you that maybe don't run your own business or haven't come across them, they're things like making sure you're acting within the correct terms of Articles of Association, promoting the business correctly, recording data, all those kind of different factors. But that also then ties into the additional, which is the more corporate social responsibility, especially wind back the clock a couple of years, that really came into play. And now, again, and without getting too technical, what businesses are looking at, and this is all interlinked, is certainly from an investment point of view, there's a real emphasis on what is called ESG investing. Now, again, without getting too technical, I can already hear people switching off because of the technical. But what effect that looks is at the environmental, the social, and the governance of businesses. Now, again, that is typically, when we use that term, that's typically talking about larger businesses. But again, exactly as your question was sort of put, Greg, I think that can actually be translated over into how smaller businesses run, or even individuals running their own self-employed.
I want to bring in one of our most frequent contributors, which is anonymous, whoever that might be. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we actually have 78 people in this session today, which is really pleasing. But it also illustrates that we all need great advice. The marvelous anonymous said something along these lines. This is picking up some of the sort of government support. As we only take a dividend each year, rather than perhaps presumably a salary, is there any governmental offer about this area, about dividends? Would you foresee that as a potential?
Yeah, so again, unfortunately, there's not been a huge amount of clarity on this, and this is definitely one of the areas, and I certainly know from a lot of clients I work with that do take, predominantly dividends from their business, and that is their main remuneration. The government has taken quite a bit of, backing for this, really, and because at the moment there simply isn't certainly when you compare versus the furlough or the self-employed grants that are available, they just haven't considered individuals with dividends and that rely on dividends. I mean, conversations that I've had, again, to the anonymous, is with clients that I've had existing, there are, if you haven't already, and apologies if I'm teaching people how to suck eggs, but review, as Sherry-Ann, what business expenses are currently being put out. And I know, again, we'll probably touch on commercial leasing and that kind of thing, but try and cut down as much as possible from the business so that you do free up potentially some capital in which you can release as a dividend. Again, got to be very careful with that, but also look personally as well. And I know, especially people with families, and actually what has happened is people's expenditure has actually gone up quite a bit personally because they're spending more time at home, which, etc., and needing to, buy new bikes and all those kinds of different factors. But where possible, try and reduce it so there's less need for you to take a dividend out of the business.
Can I come back to this dividend point? I mean, clearly none of us know, and it's one of these classic areas of no one knows anything, but that's the truth. But I just want to put a pessimistic view to you, which is this. Currently, the government appears to show no interest in limiting the JRS and other grants and so on to companies, larger companies, who are paying dividends to their institutional shareholders. There isn't a quid pro quo. If you're paying money out, you shouldn't be getting money in from the government. That doesn't seem to be in the government's thinking. Given that on a macro basis, is there any real prospect, in your view, and it's a judgment, that there will or even could be a structure which somehow ring fences dividend payments to smaller business owners such as ourselves and many others on this call?
Yes, so I mean, to sort of tackle the first part of that, Greg, there have been businesses out there, and certainly if you look at the FTSE 100, I don't want to name examples, but if you look at the FTSE 100 businesses, they have reduced quite heavily the dividends that they are paying out. So there has been some initiative, and again, it probably comes back down to the sort of responsibility they have to their consumers as well as the general public. There has been a reduction in the dividend, but you're quite right, there hasn't been that universal, right, okay, big businesses, you need to really limit this. Relative to
it's been voluntary, essentially. It's not been government-led.
Correct. It has been, and I think that probably gives us a very good indication of how things are going to move forward. It'll be based on a voluntary basis, and again, without seeming too pessimistic, because again, there are a lot of positives that can come out of this scenario. It will potentially fall, certainly over the short term, to businesses and their owners, and to sort of prop everything up and foot the bill to a certain extent and make the sacrifices. Now that's, again, judgment view and very broad sort of brush approach, but I can't see how, with the complexities of dividends and the sort of ring fencing that you mentioned, how at the moment they can put something in place.
Let's come on to a point you've briefly touched on about credit control. I want to ask an in-principle point, and then shortly to bring in John Weir to ask a point about landlords and rental contracts. So John, if you're prepped for that, that's your 2-minute notice. Credit control, clearly, all businesses are two sides of the same coin. We need to be tighter on our credit control and yet flexible, because we want our suppliers still to be in business and to have our brand relationships and all the good stuff that we do. Many companies will want to defer their payments, yet at the same time, they're pushing their creditors to get money in. Are we really all in it together?
Yes. I think the very simple answer to that is yes. Now, don't get me wrong, there are going to be businesses and industries and even individuals that will come out of this better than others. So your sort of analogy of all being in the same storm, if not the same boat, is probably a very nice way of generalising that. Again, credit controllers. I think if we look at it from a macro perspective, so again looking at Bath, the Southwest on a much smaller individual basis rather than global. It again goes back down to the responsibility and obligation that we have to each other as businesses. Now, by its very virtue that we're all here today, and if we look back at unashamed plug here, but the business life, Bath Life business lunches, and all the other events that are out there, that sense of community puts us from a macro perspective in a really, really good stead, because I think lots of us now, I've had a quick look down the attendees list, and I know that from a B2B perspective, we've worked with and have worked with a number of people and businesses listed there. And having that additional relationship and knowing the people that sit behind those businesses is going to enable us to have more frank conversations. Now, again, it's a slightly separate point with landlords and from a commercial aspect, but from a business to business and a service on whatever level it is, or product whatever level it is, there's an honourability and a need, I think, for us to be even more vocal with each other to say, look, we had every intention on this. Here's what the contract says. Is there a level of flexibility? But again, we shouldn't be, and I don't think we would, but people shouldn't try and take advantage of that. There's a risk that the minority can ruin it for the majority in that sense.
Well, there's a clear symbiosis. This is an ecosystem, and if we, whomever the we is, refuse to pay our bills, then what goes around comes around. Others will be likewise. And if I heard an expression of what became the crash in 2008. That it was originally the credit crunch, if you remember that expression. And someone explained that credit is based on the Latin term credo, to believe, and the whole thing is a belief system which we all operate. And if I believe that I will do something that you want and that you're going to pay me, that makes sense, because then I have money, because I can then pay other people. And that's the ecosystem. But if anyone breaks that ecosystem, says, you know what, can't do it, that's when problems occur. We absolutely have to stand together. And I think your point about a business community, particularly in a city such as Bath, where the relationships are so tight, is incredible. It's more important now than it's ever been. But John, I'd like to bring you in. So John Weir, you run an events, conference and magazine business. I'd like to ask your point about landlords and rental contracts.
Morning, Greg. I hope you're all doing well. Yeah, I was particularly interested. I mean, we run a business that is within Bath, but has a wider remit. We do events globally. We also publish magazines and digital content. We were talking to our landlord in the same way that you've been outlining, and saying, well, look, we've got to be flexible here, because quite clearly I can't sit in the office at the moment. And their response was, well, you were getting grants. I mean, everyone can apply for grants. You're getting rent rebates from Baines. Why can't you pay us? And in a way, that brought me onto a wider thought, which was, given that so many contracts at the moment are sort of long term, so you take an office space for maybe 3 or 4 years, do you think there's going to be a bit of a swing now where people will say, well, look, we can't possibly commit, given where the business is, to a long-term lease? Do you think that contracts will have to be more flexible, because otherwise people will just be thinking to themselves, well, I can't really afford this, and what if looking at their cash flow in the longer term rather than just the short term, and saying, well, what's going to happen next?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, John. I think, and I'll come on to an example that I've had over the last week, which is a similar sort of situation to yours by the sounds of it. I think, unfortunately, by the very nature of contracts, they are designed to be quite set in stone, and the level of flexibility is often minimal. And again, I'm sure legal teams will discuss that in more detail. What I think that if there is going to be a shift, what I think the shift would potentially look like is, whereas typically, and again, this leads into the example that I've got, where typically, property and commercial leases may be 10 years plus, and with a sort of a 50% break clause within that, I think what we'll probably see, and this will be led by business owners and as us as consumers of those leases will be a shift to more shorter term requirements. Now, I know landlords are typically against that, and certainly a lot of the property in Bath is sort of held in trusts and, you know, difficulties with trustees, etc. But I think there's going to be, as a consumer need, I think there will be a shift that way. Again, the example that I've got is that this week I was having a conversation with a client of mine who 12 months ago took out a 10-year lease on a property in the city centre. They've got a 5-year break clause and they're having extreme difficulty at the moment. And again, almost completely reiterating your point about, well, you've had grants, you've had loans, why can't you pay us? And unfortunately, there's an element of hiding behind the contract sometimes, which is causing businesses, you know, difficulties such as you just described. I think there needs to be, and again, I know that landlords in their own right are businesses to a certain extent themselves. But again, it goes back down to that point that we mentioned earlier about, you know, having a responsibility in it to each other about, you know, not going there to sort of simply haggle for, you know, reductions and holidays, so say, but at least having that conversation. Again, it always goes back down to communication. But you're not the only person, John, as you probably already know, that unfortunately is having difficulties with that.
I suspected as much.
Yeah, unfortunately so.
And to both of you, I think there's one of the things that's happening with coronavirus is an acceleration of trends which are already in place. And I think there has been a growth towards more flexibility from landlords, born of, exactly as you're saying, from companies. And we know that in a different guise through a not-for-profit organisation we run called Creative Bath. And that sector particularly, many of those are startup businesses, many of those are project-based businesses. That sector really can't commit to longer term rents in any case. And so the need for one level, the co-working hubs, and the other more sort of shared office space and so on. That trend is happening in Bath strongly already. But I want to come on to the slightly more general points, Greg, if I may, that again, looking at the way that work will happen. At the moment, we are all at home with our lovely backdrops and so on, flowers in vases and such like. The idea right now that we're all going to be housed in things called offices and be proximate to our colleagues and so on is pretty scary for many people, and actually is just not even on the radar, and we don't even know when it is. Do you think there's going to be either bigger pressure on commercial property valuations because exactly that tendency that we can work from home very adequately, many of these businesses, through media such as this? Or do you think it'll actually go the other way because you'll also have bigger companies downsizing, and so they will be looking for smaller premises and so on, and potentially the top end might be filled by companies moving, you know, perhaps from London, larger cities and so on, for whom the West is a very safe haven. Right now, our figures on coronavirus are way, way, way better than other areas, and our quality of life and all the good stuff and so on. Just map out what you think in terms of potential commercial property values.
So again, it's a very interesting point because you have got those two very clear schools of thought. Again, from a judgment perspective, I probably lean more towards the former of your two there, and I think that there is a real opportunity that there will be a reduction in certainly the smaller scale valuations of property, which then, again, from an opportunity point of view, opens up a whole host of opportunities to businesses and business owners. I mean, traditionally, and for most businesses, it's the only way in which we can go about things. But traditionally, we will rent from commercial landlords, etc. But with the lower valuations, and certainly businesses that have managed to fare very well through this sort of period and moving forward, there is a real opportunity for them to potentially look, rather than renting, to potentially look to purchase. And again, we talk about distressed assets, and I know we don't want to touch on that too much, but there is an opportunity there for people to really look at other ways in which you can look to utilise these facilities and take advantage of these. And I think as a community as well, we've got a duty to, again, always goes back, this is so interlinked in every single way. It goes back down to the responsibilities that we have as individuals to each other as well. But again, if I had to come down on one side of the fence, Greg, I'd probably say that, again, happy to be proven wrong, that valuations are likely to reduce, certainly over the short term, as some businesses come out, but then likewise other people are then trying to get into those.
You said that you don't really want to talk about distressed assets, so inevitably I'm going to ask you about distressed assets. We don't want to be predatory or opportunistic in our thinking. However, asset sales is two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, these are, and it will happen, and it was already happening, companies and owners who are frankly desperate to get out with what they can, and they need that lifeline, which the other side of the coin is the buyers provide. How are you advising those companies which either have a healthier cash position or a business model which is more robust or simply larger scale? How are you advising them about that issue of distressed assets?
Yes, it's a very, very sensitive subject, and especially as we are such a tight-knit and close community, especially within the Bath area. So typically when there is a local asset and a distressed asset, so for those of you that aren't quite sure, what that effectively means is lower value than typically would be expected because of external circumstances. And I think, Greg, your point there was, more focusing on, right, okay, if let's say I'm a business owner and I'm 55, 60 years old and looking to potentially sell, I might have to sell it at quite a heavy discount than what I would usually be prepared for. Look, at the end of the day, I think, again, it may sound too commercial for some, but hopefully it doesn't come across this way. We are all in business, and unfortunately, as much as there's a big influence on community and working together, we all do have to remember that this sometimes is a very sort of cut and dry world we live in. Now, there are certain ways in which people can conduct themselves, when they're looking at, acquisitions or buyouts or whatever form it is. And my only sort of remit is I do try and encourage people to be as ethical as possible, while also factoring in the economy of it all, because, I'm not going to sit there and say we should, consider the seller's situation. They should do to a certain extent, but again, in certain aspects, we do have to be, again, it's always deemed as a bit of a negative word, but selfish in a positive way.
Well, I mean, ultimately, some sellers will have to sell, and they need buyers. And I personally, I don't think we should sort of shy away from that fundamental truth that business relies on the exchange of value one way or another. And if you are a business owner and you've got obligations, the way to meet your obligations may, in reality, be to sell your assets to some other company, even if it is at a distressed price. I want to continue this morbid vein, and oh God, bloody hell, this is hard. And let's talk about insolvency. Hurrah! That's, as I don't even know why I'm smiling. My apologies. That is an absolute place of last resort. It's where none of us ever wish to find ourselves. But how do you advise the sense checking, the coming to terms with that being an option for certain businesses, which we're very sorry to say will happen at some point?
Yeah, I mean, Greg, I completely reiterate your point. It's not a nice conversation to have, but again, it goes back down to, look, we're in business, we have to take on these risks, and unfortunately, even in positive times, businesses do unfortunately, for phrase, go under. For those of you that haven't come across it before, maybe slightly newer to the sort of industry as a whole, effectively insolvency is where you can't afford to pay your liabilities and meet what debts and credit you owe to other people. Look, insolvency is itself, again, very high level view, is sort of very heavily governed by legislation. So, we've got the Insolvency Act, I think 1986, and the Enterprise Act 2002, which govern, how insolvency processes and the parties to insolvency that need to be there. But my sort of, generic advice to people is, if you are concerned, and you really do feel like as an individual or as a company you are at the end of the road, then speak to people that you know from the internal community. If you've got peers maybe in the same industry, speak to them, see if they're having the same issues. And then if you are a bit alone in that, that's probably when it's best to then bring in some form of legal counsel or professional in that remit. As business owners, we have a benefit, and again, I don't want to touch on the legal ramifications too much, because I'm sure that will follow in next week and be a big part of next week. But what we do have to look at is our responsibilities. So we have a benefit as business owners, certainly of limited companies, that we are separate from the business to a certain extent. So the business, again, without getting too technical, is a separate legal entity. So to a certain extent, the buck stops with the business if you do go down those insolvency routes. However, if we are deemed to be continuing business, and again, it comes under sort of wrongful trading. If we are continuing business when we know that things are really going to struggle and that we are almost certainly going to end up going to have to go down the insolvency route, then again, that gap between us and the business can sometimes be lifted, and we can become personally liable. But again, it seems quite negative. It is unfortunately one of those conversations that I hope it doesn't, and I genuinely mean that. I hope that there are few businesses that have to go through this, especially the ones that obviously we work with and in the local area. But as you said, Greg, I think unfortunately for some it is an inevitability.
Just to take a stand-back point in this area, but applies to all others, I think your point about communication, about talking to your peers, your colleagues and other businesses is absolutely right. Again, to go back to that 2008 crash, what was marked at that time, at first it was, oh, it seems to be rather bad, but it's not affecting us. Then it's, yeah, business is a bit patchy. Patchy was a euphemism, which when I heard that word being used, you knew that everyone was beginning to have a problem. And then, of course, it becomes a realization that there is a problem. This time round, we've all gone straight to the openness. It is bloody hard out there, but let's talk and see if we can figure out any ways of collaborating or working with our creditors or debtors to enable as many of us collectively to get through, just as we are all on a micro basis, trying to enable as many of our employees to get through and our business offerings through. Okay, talking about employees, Nathan, I don't know if you'd like to come back in again. This is your point about employment law and legally making redundancies. Greg, I know you won't have the legal expertise, so I just want you to comment on process, but Nathan again.
Yeah, so I guess if you were to go down a redundancy route, which again I stress I don't wish to, but there's a real challenge on the economic argument, and the law would say that they actually need to prove that in the relevant different areas. But with furlough being there, the economic argument for that in any way, shape, or form that it is. And if you're trying to future-proof your business, and that might be repurposing it for something else, how you might be able to adjust for that, because the legal argument would be one that the economic support's there, therefore you, in the same way as the conversation just now around paying rent, it's how do you find that right balance and make sure that you're not putting yourself in a difficult position when all you're trying to do is survive for the future.
Yeah, so again, Nathan, really, really good point there. I think, again, the furloughing opportunity there has certainly muddied the water somewhat, and your point about you have to prove that sort of economic instability to be able to legitimately and legally make people redundant, amongst a whole other host of things. I think the businesses, again, that are really going to struggle are those that, and again, I don't want to generalize too much, but are those that may have had a degree of difficulty before this, and are certainly businesses, and there will be some that have struggled coming into this environment that we're now in, are given real difficulty. So if you're in that situation, and again, I'm not suggesting that you are, Nathan, but if you're in that situation, I think it does become easier. Again, if from an employment law perspective, and again, I don't want to cover off on too much of what will be next week. But yes, my advice is the earlier you can speak to legal counsel on what you should be doing and when you should be doing it, and then factoring in all the other cash flow perspectives as well that we sort of talked about beforehand, I think that's going to put you in the best possible position. But again, it goes back down to the point that I know Greg and I have discussed in previous questions. Communication is vitally important. I think certainly for employees where they may have been in the business for a long time, and if they are at risk, again, you don't want to put fear into people, but if there is a real chance that people are going to have to be made redundant, and I've had this conversation with someone yesterday evening, actually, speak to your employees about it. It's a difficult conversation to have and prep them for it, but have those conversations with them where you can, and explain that these are the situations and what processes you're going with, because where we have seen sudden redundancies in any, not just over the last couple of months, but in any sort of circumstance, the pill's a bit more difficult to swallow when it comes completely out of the blue. And certainly if you're giving people an opportunity to maybe get a bit ahead of the game, get their CVs and things like that up together, that just then shows that you do care and that you really are, doing this and making this decision lightly.
Could I, thank you for that. I'm not going to name the person. I'm afraid I don't know if they would welcome me naming them, so I'm not going to, but I'm going to praise what they've said. It's in this exact area. In their particular business, they're saying their income at the moment is virtually nil. but they've got the obligation of their team, and they say they already pay quite high salaries. So their options really are trending towards redundancy. And maybe this is for Sherry-Ann as well as you. How best to broach that conversation with the teams? Because once you start a conversation, it's like being on a bit of a ski slope. There's sort of no way back. It's really hard when faith and trust breaks down and individuals realize that the bifurcation is about to happen. They're going to be out on a limb or something. So either for you, Greg, or for Sherry-Ann, how do you broach that conversation?
I'll pass on to Sherry-Ann sort of after, but my sort of 50p on that would be, look at this. Again, goes back down to the modelling that you're using. Have a look at how that could potentially impact you and your business and how the restructuring would actually work, because certainly from, if we have to make redundancies, then as a business, that's a very difficult decision to make. But then if you're having them to do almost a second wave of redundancy after that, the remaining employees that are in that business are often very, very nervous, understandably so. So I think making sure that you are making the correct number of people, and again, obviously I know there's legal points that you have to make sure that you're satisfying, making sure that it's not a continuous wave of redundancies that are being made, and where possible and if possible, obviously, to sort of group it together. But I think Sherry-Ann probably have some other bits on that she can probably contribute as well.
Yeah, I think internal communication is so important in this kind of situation. Most of the time you take face-to-face. Transparency is so important. But in this kind of environment, how do we do that? How do you have a conversation with someone about making them redundant over a video call? It's really, really difficult. I think that all you can do as a business owner is think about how you would feel in that situation and what you would like that person to say. I always try to put myself in that other person's shoes and think, if I were them, how would I want this communicated? And the way that we've always run our business is we are honest about everything that we do. And I think that's all you can ask of business owners. And I think that's all you can do in these kind of environments and times.
Again, that communication word just keeps coming back. I just, if I may, I just want to switch back to the insolvency point. It's an observation from Dan James, who is an insolvency practitioner. He just makes the point, and it relates to communication. Insolvency is not the only option. In their case, they actively seek rescue and restructuring packages for businesses to allow them to survive. Anyone who's got any issue, and I'm sure exactly the same with, of course, with Unividual and how it advises, they should seek advice as soon as possible. Start those conversations. We're coming towards the end of this, and I've got a couple of questions to go. I'd like to bring Greg back in this. When you're thinking about a business, when you're advising businesses, which is better to do? To say to people, stick with what you have, that way of working, and just try to make sure you're winnowing out costs and pushing revenues as high as possible, or to look for the radical pivot, to look for the new business models, the new ideas that are going to help you get out of this?
Well, again, it's industry specific, but there's been a huge amount of talk about pivoting, and I think the businesses, as Sherry-Ann and yourself have both touched on, businesses that have fared better than others, not necessarily well, but better than others in this, have had a degree of pivoting from what I've seen. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a complete U-turn on what you as a business do. But again, with looking at the costings of business as well, if there are opportunities, which again, communication, we keep on talking about it, sometimes that can not necessarily be spotted by the top ranks, but it can be the people lower in the business that may have spotted an opportunity over the past few weeks. So talk to them and, bring them in on those conversations. It's not always due to directors or owners to have revolutionary or even, moderate ideas of how to update processes or services. So where appropriate, obviously we don't want to be inundated, especially for a business of reasonable size. You can end up spending all your time having to bat away potentially good ideas, but at least having the ability to have those conversations. So it is a bit in between, Greg, if I'm honest, if I can sit on the fence on that one a little bit. But certainly from what I've seen with my clients recently, it probably errs more to the side of pivoting rather than sticking to what we know.
Yeah, so just to push a point slightly, so basically the steer is wherever possible, look for new business models, but don't depart too much from what you've done, I guess. And I just reiterate that point about new idea generation. In the best of businesses, it's always been the case. There is no hierarchy of new ideas, and the more communication out, the more engagement that teams, individuals feel with a company, the more likely they are to come up with the smart ideas that can generate value. And it seems to me one of the big things today has been communication. I think one of the others, which we've sort of touched on here, is ingenuity. The human spirit is capable of many things. It's capable of absorbing horrors and terrors and difficulties, and to come back resilient. But it's through ingenuity and creativity in business, which I think we will find some of those new business models which will help us. On our last question, I'd like to bring in Dave Dixon, and it is the impossible bigger picture question. Dave.
Morning, Greg. Thanks, everybody. Excellent session. I think for me, when you look at most businesses, they're in it for the long term, 10, 15 odd years, and for some, like Unividual, passing down through the family. So what do we think of the new long-term, I suppose, economic forecast since COVID-19? How do we think that may have changed for the country and probably globally now?
Well, Dave, thanks for your question, and leave it to you to ask me one of the most difficult, I argue. But look, this again is all judgment. And if we all had a crystal ball, then we'd all be in different situations. Now I can tell you that. But look, I think we need to have an air of positivity, and that isn't a delusional air of positivity. It needs to be a correct one. I think over the short term, when we discussed it, we are going to all face challenging times. That's universally accepted. Longer term, and certainly over the timeframes that you've mentioned there, Dave, look, we are not going to return to a norm. I think that would be one of the biggest mistakes as a collective, economically, that we could make from this. But what we've seen, and again, all we can go on is what we've seen in the past, whether it's the 2008 or way further back, at times when we've had crisis for whatever reason. We, as a country, and typically globally as well, have always recovered. And whether that is a V shape, whether it's a U shape, or however long that is, I certainly think over the time frames that you're discussing there, Dave, I can't see how we wouldn't be able to recover up to the levels that we were previously and also before. But that is going to be solely reliant on business owners, taking the reins of it all and discussing all things that we have today. But also all those additional extra factors that we need to consider. And I'm sure next week we'll cover off some of the legal factors that we have to consider. But from a positive note, and I hope this isn't sounding deluded, but no, I really think certainly locally and looking at the macros, we will fare very well from this, provided people communicate and they learn and they stick together.
Great.
Very good. That sounds like, and by the way, for those who don't know, and I can't imagine anyone in the school doesn't, Dave Dixon, of course, is with Minuteman, and has a variety of business services, which I'm sure he'll be very delighted to seek to sell you as and when we can all start recovering. It's a good note to end on. I think we are all changed utterly from this experience. We all have to find ways of going forwards. The point's been made strongly about communication, hand in hand with that is collaboration as well. And the ingenuity point as well. On your behalf, all 78 of you, I would like to thank Unividual today, to Sherry Ann and to Greg. Could we give them a sort of a virtual clap or something? Would be very, very welcome. Thank you also to you for your time and your questions. And please look out for our next Bath Life Business Club, virtual Bath Life Business Club, which is this Monday. It's a wellbeing special, both mental and physical wellbeing. And it includes the utterly irrepressible David Flatman, but also Bath Mind charity and Yoga Do as well, talking about all aspects of wellbeing, which is another aspect which is very front of mind for us all. That's Monday at 10 o'clock, so please do join us for that. We had a great session this week and looking forward to a really good one next time around. We've touched on this a couple of times. We're going to have a whole series of these business surgeries. If your business has a business service which is relevant, particularly in the area of advice, because we all need advice, please come to us and we can arrange an event such as this, which will help you generate business, but more importantly, will help the participants perhaps understand a little bit more about them. These are crucial diagnostic sessions. The next one is about legal and HR issues with Mojas Druitt next Friday at 10 a.m. We all need help navigating here. This is a really, really tough time, but this too shall pass. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the very first Bath Life Business Surgery. Thank you. Bath together.